No problem. So the Gemara that we were learning talked about a number of different types of sukkahs. We had the sukkah of the Yitzrim, the potters, and that make pottery. The sukkahs of the Ganvach and the Rakbash. These 8 types of sukkahs that the Gemara was trying to figure out if they are considered kosher, and each of the cases had questions, as maybe one is more obvious than the other, and therefore it included the others in their brises. So again, we had 2 different brises. One talked about the Ganbach sukkahs, but at the end of the brisa, it added, and also other sukkahs are also kosher, and it meant to include the Rakbash sukkahs. And then we had a brisa that talked about the Rakbash sukkahs, and it said, and also other simple sukkahs are also going to be kosher, and that was the sukkahs of the Ganbach. And these were 8 cases of 8 cases of what you may have thought of as questionable. What are these cases? So the cases of the Ganbach was the sukkah of the Goyim, meaning a non-Jew made the sukkah. Obviously, he did not have in mind for sukkahs. The sukkah of Nashim, women, that also did not have in mind for sukkahs. The sukkah of a behema, or made for a behema, or built by a behema. An animal made the sukkah, or made for the animal. It was not intended for a sukkah. And then you have the sukkahs kutim, the sukkah of kutim, which we discussed a little about this scenario where you had converts that were not 100% kosher converts. Now, what really invalidates a conversion? So, and this is very applicable because we have a lot of people that are in a state where their conversion is questionable, and they might not even know it until they try to get married. And then they go to get married, and the rabbi says, you know what? You're going to need to do another conversion as a suffix, as a doubt, because we're skeptical about your initial conversion. You need to go through another conversion. It's very embarrassing and painful, and probably emotional as well. How what people have to go through, but it all boils down to the fact that there are a few things that can invalidate a conversion. One of them is if you don't really accept to want to be properly Jewish, which part of that exception is definitely accepting the main laws, like keeping Shabbos properly, keeping the holidays, some of the kosher, some of the main fundamental laws of Judaism. If a person did not really accept those laws, then for sure their conversion is not valid. Now, they might not know all the details of the laws of Shabbos, but at least the general understanding of Shabbos that they've accepted. There may be other opinions that need more, that want, acceptance of the entire Torah, but at least the acceptance of the fundamental rules of Judaism, they need to accept in a general way, that they've accepted to keep the Shabbos holy, to keep kosher, and maybe some other laws as well. Woman goes to mikvah, and man puts tefillin on, and so on. And these, and these would be, having mezuzahs on their house, on their doors. So that would be, these would seemingly be things that would invalidate their conversion. Another thing that would invalidate the conversion would be if they do not have kosher witnesses that are witnessing the conversion. When a person converts, so generally generally. The way it needs to be done is you need to have the witnesses that are kosher edim. They have to be kosher. Now, what makes an aid, what makes a witness kosher? Would also include if they keep Shabbos properly. If a person publicly desecrates the Shabbos, they're not a kosher witness. So, for example, if a person was converting with, let's say, in a conservative synagogue, so the problem that may come up is, number one, the people who are the witnesses are probably not themselves fully Shomer Shabbos. You know, they might come to shul on Shabbos, but they might drive to shul, or they might, watch TV on Shabbos. They might do other things and do other desecrate Shabbos in other ways publicly. That would mean that they're not kosher for witnesses. They're not a kosher witness, which has other ramifications as well. For example, if they're at a wedding and they are chosen to be the witness for the wedding, that wedding is not really a valid wedding because they're not Shomer Shabbos, they're not kosher witnesses.
Rebbe, I would just make a little distinction between, you said two things. They may drive to shul or they may watch TV. Okay. One is b'far hesya and one is not.
Uh-huh.
So I would just say you have to be very, very careful here.
Right.
How are you going to focus in
on Shomer Shabbos?
Just going to be a shiloh about everything you do.
I understand. Okay, good point. Good point, Isaac. So anyway, in publicly, at least, they shouldn't desecrate the Shabbos, going to stores, buying stuff on Shabbos and other things. Thank you, Isaac.
Rabbi?
Yes,
I have another thing I was once asked to be a witness in a situation, and it was a conservative wedding, and it turned out to be that the person who was getting married was my mother, and I didn't realize all the details of the laws of witnesses. So I was a kosher witness that I was Shomer Shabbos, but I was not a kosher witness because it was my mother, and I found that afterwards. The rabbi said, "Oh, you're a kosher witness. Let's get you as the witness." And I didn't know what to say or what to do. So when I found out afterwards that I was not a kosher witness because it's my mother.
So the rabbi of the conservative synagogue considered you kosher to be a witness. That's interesting.
Right. As I was the most kosher witness he could figure out. I was the only from guy in the whole crowd.
Wow.
He figured I was the most choice witness there could be. Who could be more kosher than the guy who's Shomer Shabbos than a chassid?
Actually, David, what you're saying is it happens often that people don't realize that there's also laws of witnesses that they can't be related. And if the witness is related, it also invalidates it. So there could be situations where a person is chosen to be a witness and it's not a kosher witness. Now, I don't mean to just to single out the conservative conversions. I only mentioned conservative because those are the most questionable if they might be kosher. In other words, Reform conversion is much less even a thought that it's kosher, because a Reform conversion or Reconstructionist conversion, the rabbis themselves don't follow a lot of the fundamental laws of Judaism. So for sure, the acceptance of Judaism is going to be a very weak acceptance in other, but conservative, at least the older conservative rabbis were somewhat more serious about at least the main laws of Judaism that they kept. Of course, over the years, they've come up with many, changes to their original rules, and that have, furthered them from being following halacha properly. But originally there was a lot of question about conservative conversions because you had these issues of, number one, was the person accepting the Judaism properly? And number two, are the witnesses kosher? And often, even if the acceptance could be considered acceptable, but the witnesses problem was much more easy to invalidate a conversion. And so I have a friend who was marrying a nice Jewish family, a girl from a nice Jewish family. It turned out that the girl had to do an extra conversion before she got married. And they were a little shocked, but she had to do it because it was her grandmother converted, and it wasn't 100. They weren't 100% sure that it's a kosher conversion. It ended up that it was embarrassing. Of course, the granddaughter needed to convert again, and so that's gives us a little understanding of the rules of conversion. And here we're talking about a sukkah made by the Kutim. And the Kutim, their conversion is really a very interesting situation with their conversions, because on the one hand, it seems that the common understanding is that they converted because of the lions. That means that they converted for the wrong purpose. And the question is, does that invalidate the conversion if they converted for the wrong purpose? In other words, if they accepted the Torah properly, but they just converted because they were afraid of lions, but they accepted it, and the witnesses were kosher witnesses, would that be a kosher gerus? So Taisvis over here, he brings a Gemara in Yevamos, and he says, what's the problem with gerei arayos? There's a Gemara in Yevamos that say even people who convert because there are lions that are swallowing up the goyim, and they understand that it's because they aren't converting to Judaism, so they go and convert, and they accept the Torah with kosher witnesses. The Gemara in Yevamos says that's a kosher kulam gerim. They're considered kosher converts. And the Gemara there brings another case. They're called gerei chaloimos. If a person has a dream, that they're told in a dream, you have to go and convert, and they go and convert, it's considered a kosher conversion. So why does our Gemara, and I mentioned that it's not only our Gemara, it's throughout the entire Shas. You have this term called the Kutim, these people from Kuta that they came to Israel, were brought to Israel, exiled to Israel from Kuta, which I think is Ethiopia. I may be wrong. But anyway, they were exiled there to Israel from Shalmaneser, the king of Ashur, the king of Assyria, and he brought them to Israel. And after they exiled the 10 tribes, of the 10 northern tribes, the Jewish people. So they brought these people to Israel. They were getting swallowed up by the lions, and they said, we should convert. Maybe the God of this country is angry. It was angry if we don't convert, so they converted. And if you convert for the wrong purpose, that's considered a kosher conversion, the Gemara Yevamos says. So why throughout the Shas do we question these convert? Do we say it's a machlokes, it's an argument? So Taisvis says the reason why we don't accept the Kutim, or the reason why in the Mishnah there's a question about the Kutim, is not because they did it for the wrong purpose, but really it's because they really had two gods. They trusted, they feared Hashem, and they also feared their God. And so the gerus, the conversion of the Kutim, was not a good conversion in the first place because they didn't accept the Torah properly. What do I mean? They didn't accept one God. That's number one. The number one acceptance of Judaism is that you accept Hashem. Instead, they had another idol that they were worshiping, right? So the acceptance of the Torah of Judaism was not a proper acceptance. So Taisus then says, so then what about the other opinion? What does the other opinion say? That the Gerei Arayos, that these Kutim are considered kosher converts. How would that be acceptable to say that they are kosher if they never really gave up their idols? They just added another god to their list of gods, to their worshiping the people, the things they worship. They added Hashem. That's not good enough for acceptance of Judaism. So the question is, so why are there opinions that the Gerei, these Kutim are kosher? How would anyone say they're kosher? So the answer Taisva says is the rabbis that say the Kutim are Gerei Emes hold that they actually went and converted again later on. Their initial conversion was definitely not good. But the question is if they actually went in a conversion, and maybe then their conversion was good. And the final conclusion of the Gemara is that they're not accepted. And that's because later on we found that even later, even if you want to say that their conversion later was a good conversion, but in the end we saw that they really didn't convert properly because they still were worshiping they were worshiping on Mount Aval and other things, and therefore in the end the final conclusion is that the Kutim are not accepted in Judaism. Yes, David.
Could I share a picture real fast from Steinsaltz Gemara?
Yeah, sure.
Is that coming out?
Yeah. But
This is from 1905. It's a picture of a high priest, like a Kohen Gadol of the Kutim, with the Torah scroll. 1905 in Israel.
So that's interesting. I didn't necessarily connect the Kutim with the Shomronim, but I guess Rabbi Steinsaltz says that's the same. They're from the same group.
Yeah, he says Kutim, the Samaritans. Yeah.
Let's look at that paragraph that he says. Let's see that I just in case I missed anything over there. So these are the descendants of the nation displaced by Sancheriv, king of Assyria, and brought Sel. Initially, they converted. Over time, they readopted their original religion, but continued to fulfill several mitzvahs. The beginning of the Second Temple era, during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, relations between them and Jews deteriorated. Later, they established a center in Har Gerizim, as they claimed the sanctity of that mountain was established by one of the Ten Commandments. Consequently, there's very real possibility that their blessings and prayers, although similar, might conclude in a manner antithetical to Judaism. Some generations of Jewish sages recognized them as half-Jews. They went so far as to say in the mitzvahs that the Samaritans adopted, they are extremely exacting in their fulfillment, even more than the Jews are. Ultimately, as they continue to distance themselves from Jewish people in virtually every regard, they were accorded the legal status of Gentiles. Okay.
Wow.
You see that picture? It's like, wow. Yeah.
Well, the problem is the picture is not so clear to us. Explain to us what you see in the picture. So they have a Sefer Torah. It looks like a Sephardic Sefer Torah to us. What exactly do you see there?
No, it says that he's a high priest, like a Kohen Gadol.
Okay, the high priest part. But what about the Torah itself? Do you see something different there in the Torah itself? It's a little hard to see if it looks priest. Oh,
No,
just the fact that they have a high priest. That's more what you're showing us.
Well, I'm also showing that it's in 1905 they were actually considered like you think to yourself, what could a person possibly look like? Like you have no idea what these people look like, and here the guy looks like a from Jew.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So anyway, it's there are groups of these Shomronim in Israel and different places. I think Haifa also has a group, but Yes, Mordechai.
Isn't it that with the coup team that unlike with Jews, if you hear the end of the bracha, you can say amen. With the kuti, you need to hear the entire bracha to make sure, like at the beginning, he didn't say something like Baruch atah Yonah.
Right, right. I think there is something like that. I don't remember, but I recall something along those lines. Okay, so that's the story with the Kutim, which makes it very interesting that they themselves seems like they might have had more than one conversion, and yet they ended up not it seems like it was not valid. At least the way the final conclusion is that none of their conversions do we seem to want to accept as valid. Even though at some points there were Tanoim that accepted them, and ultimately they're considered Goyim. So the Gemara that we learned, so we have these these 8 cases that we just said 4 of them. That was included the Kutim, and then we said that the other 4 are the Rakbash. What are the Rakbash? So these are like more temporary dwellings because they keep getting moved around, and one of them is the Sukkah of Royim. The shepherds they dwell in it because while they're watching the sheep. The Kayotzim, the people watching the dried figs. The Borganin are the people watching the city. And the Shomrei Peiros are literally means they watch the fruits, the vineyards, the gardens, the farms. So they weren't made l'shem sukkahs. They're not made for the purpose of sukkahs, but they are Jewish people. And anyway, so the Gemara says what is the difference between these 2 brises? The Gemara says, well, the one that says ganvach, he holds that those are much more permanent. They're going to stay there. And he says, not only are these kosher, but also the rakbash that are not so they're only there for a short time, and they're even those are going to be kosher. Now, that's an interesting point. Think about it. A sukkah is supposed to be a diras arai, supposed to be a temporary dwelling, and here our Gemara says that the sukkah that's more permanent, that makes more sense to be kosher. The ganbach sukkahs, the sukkah made by goyim, by women, by the animals, by the kutub. These sukkahs, they're more permanent. They're made to dwell in the summer, and those are more permanent sukkahs. They're going to stay there. So those would make sense to be more kosher. And the others, where you move it around, you take your watchman hut tent, and you're going to be moving it around. So that the Gemara says maybe that's not a kosher sukkah. What do you mean not a kosher sukkah? A sukkah is supposed to be a temporary dwelling. What does the Gemara mean here? That it's like kvi. If you think about it, that itself is more. That should be more of a kosher sukkah than the others. So one of the commentaries asked this question. And the answer is, he says that when you deal with a sukkah made for sukkahs, then the sukkah being a temporary dwelling is good. By you making it for sukkahs, this is a sukkah, this is a dwelling. So you're having in mind for the mitzvah, and it's a temporary dwelling. You're having in mind for a mitzvah that makes it into more of a real dwelling for sukkahs. This is called your dwelling now on sukkahs because of the mitzvah part of it. But if you didn't have in mind the mitzvah part, so then you want it to be more of a dwelling, you wanted to have more of a solid dwelling because you didn't have in mind for the mitzvah, so nothing is really making it into a dwelling. That's his answer. It's a very
Really?
interesting answer. Yes, Isaac.
It's supposed to be a diras aroi, a temporary dwelling. The question here is on the word diras, not even on the aroi. It has to first be diras. It's not something that you're supposed to just throw up over your head. It's supposed to be something of a residence. And I think the Gemara here is discussing how much of this makes it a real residence. Could you sleep in such a thing, let's say? Not that you have to, but that's what I think it would be. You have two words there, diras aroi. Until now, we went aroi aroi. Now the question is it a dira?
I like that. Good insight, Isaac. I think that's very, very, very good explanation. That the meaning of this insight that I just shared with you is really based on that word diras. That there is an element of kavios that's needed. It needs to be a dwelling. And good point. Very good point. So the Gemara is telling us that the ganbach is more a dira, it's more kavua. It's interesting the Gemara's term because the Gemara uses the word kviyi instead of it sounds like it's talking about the word arai or keva. It uses the word kviyi, but your insight fits with the logic behind it. Does seem to be seem to fit with what you're saying, Isaac. The Gemara understands that it needs to be more than just a that you're just popping into some little makeup hut, and therefore it has to have some type of permanence. I would have, without what you
style of today's pop-up sukkahs.
Well, yeah, I don't want to say a shiloh, but yeah, that's you have to think about them.
Right.
The thing I would have connected it with, besides what you're saying, Isaac, is that I would have connected it with this idea that the sukkah has to be able to last for 7 days. And if it's not a sukkah that could last for 7 days, that's a problem.
Right.
And that idea gives us that law gives us an element of kvios. It has to be somewhat of a hut, of a tent. It's not just a garbage can, it's not just a piece of paper, not just a piece of paper surrounding you, a piece of plastic bag. It has to be, it can't just be a plastic bag around around some things. It's got to be more of a solid type of a thing. So the sukkah's ganvach is more kaviyui than the sukkah's rakbash, and therefore the Gemara had a thought that maybe that the ganbach is more definite, that it's kosher than the rakbash, and therefore the Gemara says that's also kosher. And the one that says rakbash understood that rakbash is more kosher because at least it's made from the Yidden made it. So the people that made it are chayiv in a sukkah. And they also say that the ganbach, that was not people who were obligated in sukkah, they're also going to be it's also going to be kosher, even though it was made by non-Jews or by people who aren't obligated, women or animals. They're not obligated in sukkah, but nevertheless, it's going to be a kosher sukkah in there as well. So those are all the cases of this Gemara. And now, one of the things that we have to look at is each of these brises said a word. It has to be mesuchach kehilchasa. Has to have schach properly. And what does that mean? So the Gemara explains that it's asu asa'a letzel. It has to be made for shade. So if we look at Rashi over here, I'd like to read it inside Rashi Amar Rav Chizda, which is 7 lines from the wide lines of Rashi. Maybe I would say it's about 12 lines up, maybe 15 lines up from the bottom of the page. Amar Rav Chizda says, Hi kihilchasa, this word that it says in the brisa, both brises say that it has to be mesuchach kihilchasa, mesucheches kihilchasa. So this word kihilchasa, like the halacha, like it's supposed to be, the ka'amar, hu shemesucheches yafeh. It means that it's mesuchach properly, nicely. The mukha milsa, that it's recognizable, it's definite. It has to be recognizable that it's for shade and not just to be a separation, a place of modesty, a place of tznius, of cover, being enclosed. It has to be for shade. The avagav the sukkah l'shem chag loy ba'inan, even though we don't need a sukkah for the purpose of sukkahs, l'shem sukkah ba'inan, we do need a sukkah that it has to be for a sukkah. No, that doesn't have to be for a sukkahs as a mitzvah. It has to be for a sukkah for tzel. The tzel, who the mikri ol sukkah shemasuchachas minachayrav, it protects you from the heat. So the or from the sun. So the point that Rashi makes here, it really changes a major halacha, and that is that when you have a sukkah that's not made for, if it's not made for sukkahs, it's really just made for a tent, for a hut. You need to have more schach than when you have a sukkah which is made for sukkahs. If you have a sukkah made for the mitzvah of sukkah, all you need is majority schach. If you have a majority of shade in your sukkah and a minority of sunlight, you're kosher. But if you have a sukkah that's not made for sukkahs, guess what? You need much more than a majority of schach on it. It has to be recognizable that it's meant for schach, for shade. It's not just to be, it's a separation. I'm enclosing a little area here, and it has a little schach on it, and this, that. No, it's got to be muchach, that your purpose is for shade. And that really changes. So in other words, that's something that we're going to actually see in the next Mishnah as well, about the Sukkah Yeshana, which really is this idea that you have a sukkah that you didn't make for sukkahs. It's made, which is the next Mishnah that we're going to learn, that type of a sukkah has complications to it. You didn't make it, you didn't have in mind. Beis Hillel says it's kosher, but you still need that it has to be recognizable. It's got to be recognizable that it's meant for shade. If you make it for the mitzvah, no problem. All you need is majority shade. But if you make it not for the mitzvah, then you need to make sure that it has shade. So that's really an important point, that you could just skim through this Gemara and not realize that halacha. You could just say, oh yeah, it has to be made for shade and so on. No, it means that it has to be recognizable, muchach. Because how do you know that when they made it for shade? It has to be recognizable that it was made for shade. You don't know what they made it for. They didn't make it for the mitzvah of sukkah. So maybe they made it as a storage place, but how do you know that they had in mind the shade? So if it's mesuchach yafeh, if it's properly shaded, then you know it was made for shade. So that's the halacha that we're seeing over here. Okay, the other thing I wanted to mention, because David brought it up yesterday, and this was a picture that we saw in like the Tosfos, and kept on showing these pictures, and I decided maybe I'll just explain what that picture really is. I don't know if you can't really see it on mine. It's basically a square with a diamond in it. So picture a square, and then picture a diamond that's standing on its point. You have a diamond inside a square.
You want me to bring it up again?
If you can do that, that's great.
It's in the Gemaras, Rabbi.
I know, but not everyone. I don't know. Some people might be using Safaria, but if you have the Gemara, great. Anyway, so it's this picture. Thank you, David. So this picture here, what is the meaning of this picture? So this is a sukkah. This is a box that's 10 by 10. So there's 10 little boxes here. So it's 10 by 10, which basically means that you have an outer box which is 100, which is basically 100 amos, let's say 100 cubits. Now, if we want to understand the circumference, the perimeter of this box, so each box is 1 amma, let's say. So we're going to take the amma measurement, the cubit, and we'll say that it's 10 by 10. So we got a 10 by 10 box here. And altogether, if you measure all around it, well, if you measure it, what is the how many cubic feet is this box? It's 100. It's 100 cubits, 100 cubits. Now, if you make a box in the middle, the box in the middle, what it really is doing is cutting. The big box is made out of 4 boxes, let's say. There's the box called the BCFE. There's a box called the BADE. There's a box called, you could divide this box into 4 boxes. The EFIH and the EDGH. So you got these 4 boxes over here. Now, if you divide each of these boxes in half, what you end up having is an inner box here that's officially half the size of the outer box. Now, if you have the inner box, if you want to understand the rule that we said, which is the hypotenuse of this box, so the BE line, in other words, this line that goes from B to E, is going to be 5 cubits. The line from E to D is also going to be 5 cubits. Right. So 5 times 1.4 equals what?
7.
Equals 7.
No.
No. Wrong. 5 times 1.4.
7.
Well, 7, yes. 20%, yes.
Okay. So that equals 7. Now think about it. If that equals 7,
then if you make a box out of that 7, you can only have 49 instead of 50.
now why am I now? What? It's not.
Which line start again? You started with BE.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to think for a second. So that's 7, and somehow you have 49. But how do you get to 49 from 7?
7 times 7.
I know, but why are you multiplying it by 7?
Because in a box, you're making.
What do you want to? You want the inside area. The inside area is
right. The inside
7 by
area.
7.
Okay, the inside
7.
area. Okay, fine. The inside area would be 49. Okay, great. Okay, good. Okay, thanks. So because you have a box, so you multiply this wall times that wall of the box, the BD to BF, and each one, of course, is 7 because each of these hypotenuse lines is basically
If it's 7. You're saying if it's 7.
According to our calculation, which the Gemara used, it would equal 49.
Correct.
Right. The box will equal 49 square cubits. And we know that the the middle box is only
It's 50.
this middle box is half the size of the big box, because the big box, we just divided it in half. Each of these 4 small boxes, we divided in half. So the middle box is half the size of the big box, and the big box is 100. So obviously the middle box has to be 50. And according to the calculation of 1.4, it actually ends up being 49. Because
if you say those lines are 7, the point that they're making is the lines are a little bit more than
7, which means that a hypotenuse is not 1.4 exactly. It's a little more than 1.4. And so Tosfos brings this out by clarifying that even though our Gemara says that a hypotenuse is always 1 2/5, which means 1.4, but it doesn't mean it to be exact. It means it as an estimate. It's just telling you an easy way to estimate. The hypotenuse is 1.4, but really, if you wanted more exact, you would have to. It actually is the square root of 2. And if you try to figure out the square root of 2, it actually
1.414.
No, but it's not. It's many
I
more
know.
digits.
Well, I'm just giving it to you to that
Because
many
if you multiply
well, he kept going.
1.414,
but that's already more than 1.4. That's exactly right. If you keep going with that, however little or much you go with that, it's more than the 1.4.
Exactly. It's a tiny amount more, which is an irrational number. And therefore, the Gemara concludes that you're allowed to rely on this, or at least the Gemara relies on this estimate of the number, which is the same as the pi, which we
that's what I was going to say. When you say irrational number, you just went into circles, and pi, which is an irrational number.
But this also is irrational, because there isn't an actual, because if you want to say it's 1.414 and multiply that by itself, 1.414 times 1.414, it equals 1.999396. So in other words, there isn't a number. You could go on for 20 or 25 digits. You're not going to get a number that will be the exact of the hypotenuse.
Correct.
But it's approximately 1.4. And our Gemara uses the approximate. Tosfos just proves that over there by that box. There's also another way of proving it, and that is that if you take the line, which is that goes through, there's a way of proving it based on the line that goes from B to H, the line of the middle square. That's the hypotenuse. That's of the square. That's the hypotenuse of the square. So that would be this line would be 7. So the hypotenuse of that would be 7 times 1.4, which would mean that the 7 times 1.4, which would equal 9.8. Now, really, we know that this line has to be 10, because so ultimately this line has to be 10. Why does B to H have to be 10? Because we know it's 10. C to I is 10. So B to H is 10, and if we calculate the hypotenuse of the B to F,
if you calculate the hypotenuse of BDH
or BFH,
triangle, or
BFH, correct.
Either right angle, it becomes the hypotenuse.
So this hypotenuse, if we're calculating B to F as 7, then the hypotenuse of B to BEH should be 9.8. According to our calculation, if you multiply 7 times 1.4. And really, we know that it's 10 because you can see it so clearly from C to I. CFI is 10 and ADG is 10. This is for sure B to H should be 10. So that's another way of proving from this type of box that the the calculation of the hypotenuse that we're using is a little off. Now, the question really is that the Gemara gave us an opinion of Rabbi Yochanan that said you need 24 people to stand around. You can close this. Let's just stop the share, David.
Okay.
Thank you very much, David. It's good to. So the Gemara had said that Rabbi Yochanan said about a 24 people circle, and we explained that it means the circle is within the 24 people. If you have a circle that's within 24 people, it means it's basically a 6 amma diameter, which equals 18 amma, 18 cubit. It equals a circle that's 18 cubit circumference, and that would be a little more than you need. You really need a 16.8 circumference, but he calculated an 18. His calculation would be like an 18 circumference, and the Gemara said it was loy duck. It's not so exact. The difference between 16.8 and 18 is not so exact, especially because he's talking about a diameter, and diameter, the difference is from a fraction. He rounded it off to the nearest diameter, because the diameter would have been a 5 and a fraction, and he rounded it off to 6. So ultimately, it's the calculation ends up with 18. So the real question is, so the Gemara uses these calculations that are a little off, again, because the size of the circumference is not exactly 1 to 3, the ratio. It's really 1 to 3 in a fraction. So the thing is that what is the final halacha from this? Do we have to try to be exact when it comes to halacha or not? So,
Rabbi, you know what the final halacha is? Never build a house based upon what the rabbis tell you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there's no story about that. You know, Talmud went and he went and he built based upon what the rabbis told him. He said, so what happened? He says it collapsed.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
He said, never build based upon what the rabbis tell you. Their measurements are not accurate.
Uh-huh. Did they use these type of calculations, geometry, when I guess they use this when they build houses, like the hypotenuse and things like that?
That's how they built the pyramid, Rabbi.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay.
They were much more exact than the rabbis were.
Right. So the reason why the rabbis were not exact, as we see that they obviously knew how to be exact, but they explained that the Torah was given not to malachi hasharis, not to angels, and not to mathematicians, but to regular people. So when the command in the Torah, when there's a measurement in the Torah that it's given for people, it's meant for them to have a easy way to be able to estimate it. And that's that would be the halacha l'moshe misinai, that you're allowed to rely on this type of estimate. And that seems to be the way the Mishnah Brura holds paskins, because he says when you take a simple small sukkah and you want to measure how much a circle would have to be if you wanted to make the minimum sukkah in a circle, he relies on the calculations of the rabbis. And he says, well, a square sukkah is 7 by 7 hand breadths. So a circle sukkah you would need to make based on the diameter of that and so on. And it comes to 49 point something hand breadths, and that's considered a kosher kosher sukkah. So he bases the circle on the hypotenuse of the square, which again, that would be if you want to calculate it, we could calculate it also ourselves. It's basically 7 hand breadths times 1.4 would equal 9.8 times, and the circle would be 3 times that times 3. It would equal 29.4 hand breadths. So if you had a sukkah that's round, 29.4 handbreadths, the Mishnah Berurah says that's kosher sukkah. However, there are other opinions, and the other opinion would be that even though the Torah gives us, even though in the Gemara we have the calculations that they're not so exact, but when it comes to the actual halacha, you need to be more. You need to fit it. This is just for learning purposes and for students and for for people to know the general ideas. But the actual halacha that needs to be done by an authority is going to give the final halacha, that you have to fit it with the exact numbers. So obviously Mishnah Berurah is probably the accepted view here, but there is such a view that you really have to follow the exact numbers, and that would be you would have to add on to this number, and that could be why Rabbi Yochanan, who gave his calculation of 24 people, which ends up being like an 18 amma, an 18 cubit sukkah. So that's a circle. It's 18 cubits. His calculation could be because the reason why he gave that was not just as he estimated larger, was because he held you have to actually follow the correct numbers, not the estimated numbers. And that's why he gave a bigger number. That was for the learning, fine, you could use your estimated. So there is such a view, and that would explain why Rabbi Yochanan estimated larger, because he was actually saying you really have to follow, you have to go a little more, because that would be the correct measurements.